Welcome, everyone. We'll begin soon. In the meantime, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We miss seeing you all in person at the library, but we were just discussing the benefits of virtual programming as that we can reach people all around the country, all around the state, and sometimes even all around the world. So thank you for joining us tonight. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat with your name and where you're joining us from. All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Welcome to our project update for Virginia Untold, the African American Narrative. Please be aware that this presentation is being recorded so that the video can be shared online for continued learning. My name is Sonia Coleman. I'm the Digital Engagement and Social Media Coordinator at the Library of Virginia. We also have Ashley Ramey and Emma Ito from the Education Department with us to help moderate this session. To ask a question about Virginia Untold, please enter it in the chat, which you'll find in the right-hand menu that you'll see there. After the presentation, we will read each question in the order received. For specific research questions, please contact the Library of Virginia Archives Reference Services Desk at arcdesk@lva.virginia.gov. This update is offered as part of Black History Month, but Virginia Untold is a project that we work on year-round and that I am honored to be a part of. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Local Records Program Manager Greg Crawford and Senior Local Records Archivist Vince Brooks. Thank you all for being with us.
Thank you, Sonia. And thank you for all of you taking the time to join us this evening to learn about the Virginia Untold project. It is a project that we are very proud of here at the Library of Virginia to be able to provide to the public. And just to get started, the project began in 2013. We began identifying records in the Library of Virginia that were rich in African American history and genealogy, and we began to digitize and index those records then. And then recently we began a collaboration with the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. They had a project similar to ours called Unknown No Longer, and they are now collaborating with us on this project, and the images and indexing information of their records related to African American history and genealogy are also available through Virginia Untold. And these records that we have made available, there are hundreds of thousands of names and counting of enslaved and free people found in these records, but not just their names, but also their stories. And currently we have over 33,000 records available for searching through Virginia Untold. And in these records contain the stories of people, of African American people, enslaved and free from before the Civil War era. A lot of people have shared, you probably have heard yourself that for many African Americans, the Civil War era has proved to be like a brick wall because when you go back before 1865, there's little records about enslaved people and free people of color and free blacks during that time. However, the issue is that they don't exist. They do exist. It's all been about accessibility, because a lot of those records are stored in courthouses and attics and so forth, like this. One of my responsibilities here at the Library of Virginia is to go to the courthouses around the Commonwealth of Virginia to assist them with preserving their historical court records and making them available and accessible to the public. And when I go to the courthouses, I always head towards these drawers of old musty records. They are all tightly bound up in these drawers, and it looks like they've never been opened in 200 years, and they probably haven't. But when I open up these drawers, I hear voices, because in these records are the voices of people who lived 100, 200, 300 years ago. And many of the voices that are in there are the voices of African Americans, enslaved people, free people of color, free blacks, who are saying, I have a story. Will you tell my story? Somebody tell my story. And their voices are saying this seems to be saying this to me through these records. And so tonight I'm going to share a few of those stories that you can find that were at one time those voices were quieted and silent in these drawers, but now through Virginia Untold at the Library of Virginia, those voices can be heard and you can hear them yourself as you read their stories. So I'm going just to share a few of the stories with you tonight from these records. The first one I want to share is Rachel Finley's story. Rachel Finley was an enslaved woman who lived in the late 1700s into the early 1800s. She and her family sued for their freedom here in Virginia because on the basis of the fact that they were descendants of Native Americans. And so in Virginia, if you could prove that, an enslaved person could win their freedom. So they filed suit and they won their case in the late 1700s, around 1780. However, before Rachel Finley learned of the verdict, before she could hear it, the enslaver who claimed her, who owned her, had one of his relatives to take Rachel to Southwest Virginia and sell her to another person out there in Southwest Virginia. So Rachel never heard that she won her freedom. She never heard the verdict of the case. And so for the next 20 or 30 years, she remained enslaved in Southwest Virginia until finally, somehow she learned that she had actually won the case. But the thing is she had to go through the whole legal process all over again and filed suit in Southwest Virginia to win freedom for herself, her children, and her grandchildren. And so she filed suit in around 1813. But the case kept getting postponed and postponed because the judges who were hearing her case were friends with her enslaver. And so they just kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off until Rachel, after about 5 or 6 years of this, Rachel petitioned to have the case moved from that court to another court. And here she gives the reason why she wanted it moved and wanted her case heard immediately. She says that your petitioner has between 30 and 40 descendants, children and grandchildren, the liberties of all whom depend the determination of said suit. And as your petitioner is old and very infirm, her living cannot be made longer calculated upon. And should she die previous to the decision of the court, the means of proving their right to freedom would be much lessened. In other words, she's telling the judge, hey, please move this case so I can have it heard somewhere else immediately. Because if I die before this case, the verdict of this case is issued, my children, my grandchildren, they will remain enslaved. And then they would have to go through the whole process over again, much like I did. Well, the end of the story is that Rachel was successful in winning freedom. She was able to win her freedom, the freedom of her children, and the freedom of her grandchildren. So as you see in these records and these stories, in Virginia Untold, you'll find stories of enslaved people seeking freedom and persevering and wanting to win their freedom, not just for themselves, but for their descendants. Now, as much as there are stories of triumph in Virginia Untold, there's also stories of tragedy, of things that are ugly, things that are evil, and make your stomach turn and make you wonder how could this have happened. And some of those stories can be found in the coroner's inquisitions that are available in Virginia Untold. These are like crime scene investigations. A person has died in the field, or a person has died on the road or drowned, and a group of men get together to decide how this person died and determine whether or not it was by foul play, something illegal, or it was accidental, or something else. And this here is a coroner's inquisition involving an enslaved man named Robin in Prince Edward County. He was found dead, and the coroner and a group of men look at the body and they try to determine what caused his death. Well, they came to the conclusion that the cause of death is unknown. However, if you look at the depositions and testimony associated with this inquisition, you probably can learn how. Because there was one guy named Giles Cochran who examined the body of Robin, and he says he noticed that he had injuries. He had stripes on his back, a scar on his forehead that looked like he had been whipped. But he says he doesn't think he died from the whipping, because I have seen a great many in the word he used, Negroes, were whipped than I thought Robin had been. So imagine that this man has seen a lot of human beings being whipped worse than this man. So what does that say? What do we learn from that? And so this man, Robin, had died from being beaten to death. But these white men who were judging his cause of death determined, no, it was no big deal. We can't determine how he died. And then there are stories of attempts of self-emancipation. These are, the traditional term being runaways, runaway enslaved people, but they were not just running away from something, they were looking for freedom. And so I see them more as self-emancipators and trying to win freedom for themselves and others. And this isn't here. We have records in our collection that are found in our auditors of public accounts, which is basically the Treasury records. And in this, you'll learn about efforts about African Americans, enslaved people seeking self-emancipation. Here is a story of Catherine, who fled Norfolk, the place where she was living in Norfolk, and it had gotten as far as Princess Anne County, where she was captured and put in jail, declared to be a runaway. And according to law, she was to be, if her enslaver did not come to claim her, then the county could then sell her at auction in front of the courthouse, which is exactly what happened to Catherine here. Her enslaver did not show up. The county put her up for auction, and she was sold for $620.50. And you see a list of all the expenses that were taken out from her sale by the county to pay off their expenses for keeping her in jail. So the county was essentially making money off of this enslaved person. But what also we learn is that what the money that was left over from her sale, which was $375, that money went to the state treasury and immediately went into an account called the literary fund. And the literary fund was set up in Virginia to help to fund the education of poor white children. So this enslaved person was sold by the county. The county made money from her sale, the state made money from her sale, and they put that into a fund for the education of poor white children. Probably a lot of people don't know about this in Virginia history. I don't think they taught this in school in Virginia history in the schools. Oh, by the way, just to add this, while Catherine was in jail at this time, she gave birth to a male child while she was in jail. And that's also said in the report here. And so not only was she sold, but her male child was sold as well. For free, and Virginia Untold also has a lot of, we have a lot of records involving free people of color and free blacks. Not many people know that Virginia had a large free African-American population before the Civil War. And we have a number of records related to them. For example, in Virginia, African-Americans who were enslaved and then were emancipated or were born free, they were required to be registered at the local courthouse. And so they would, once after their emancipation, they would go to the courthouse, register as a free person, and in return they would get a certificate like this one that they had to carry with them at all times. If they did not have their certificate and someone who was white or a white authority figure saw them and demanded this certificate and they didn't have it, they could be put into jail. And also they could also be put back, be sold into slavery. So here is these documents were like gold to free African Americans at this time. So this is a certificate that shows when she was registered, where she was registered, her name, her skin, the tone of her skin, her height, her age, and how, in this case, she was born free in the county of Hanover. So at some point in time, Sally Armstrong here, she moved from Hanover County to the city of Lynchburg, where this record was found in the city of Lynchburg court records. She would have given her Hanover County record in exchange for a Lynchburg registration. All right, and then people of color who were emancipated, according to Virginia law, they could only remain in the Commonwealth for 1 year. They had to leave the state after 1 year, according to the law. They had to go to a free state or somewhere else, but they couldn't stay in Virginia. So we have a number of these petitions by free African Americans called Petitions to Remain that are found in Virginia Untold. They're found in Virginia Untold. And in this case, William Henry Burke filed a petition in Arlington County saying that he was a husband and a father, and his circumstances were beyond his control, and the circumstances beyond his control prevented him from taking his family out of the state. So he's saying, look, I don't want to leave Virginia. I don't want to leave Arlington. I have a wife and children here, and they can't go with me, probably because they were enslaved. So he's asking the court for petition to stay with his family. And so he filed this petition, and unfortunately, the court sided with him and allowed him to remain. However, in the case of Augustus Gordon, who was asking Chesterfield County for permission to let his wife from Caroline County to come and live with him in Chesterfield, he petitioned for the court to allow her to remain in Chesterfield County and be with him as, you know, his wife and live in his home. Well, the court said no. They refused to grant his petition. So what option would Augustus Gordon have? Go to Caroline County? If he did that, he would have to petition Caroline County to stay and live there with his wife. They could say no. So it was very difficult for free African Americans. The law made it very hard for free African Americans during this time. And if a court refused a petition to remain and said you cannot stay in Virginia, what other options did they have? They could stay in Virginia and get arrested for breaking the law, or they could do as a case of Dennis Holt of Campbell County. He filed a petition to be re-enslaved. He had been emancipated. He had gained his freedom. But however, he could not, you know, if he couldn't stay here, his only option was to be re-enslaved. And the reason he gives for wanting to be re-enslaved is because his wife Nancy was an enslaved person owned by David Hoffman. And Dennis Holt said he would greatly prefer to enslave himself to the said David Hoffman to going out of the state. He loved his wife. He wanted to be with his wife and his family so much that he was willing to give up his freedom to stay with her. That's the difficult choices many African Americans living at this time had to make, and their stories are told in Virginia Untold. And then we have also records called public claims, where enslavers were reimbursed by the Commonwealth for the loss of their, quote, property, enslaved property, that committed capital crimes. And in this case, in March 1865, an enslaved man named John, owned by George Drury, he was tried and convicted in Richmond City Court for aiding and abetting and helping enslaved people to find freedom in going across into Union lines to find freedom. He was being like an underground railroad for enslaved people in Richmond, assisting them during the Civil War to gain freedom. And the thing is, he was caught doing it, and when he was tried, he was tried and convicted, and he was sentenced to be sold out of the state of Virginia. That was his punishment, to be sent out of the state of Virginia. And his owner, his enslaver, was reimbursed for his, quote, loss, $6,000, which is like $90,000 in today's money. But this man was trying to win freedom for other enslaved people, and his story is being told in Virginia Untold. And then we have deeds of emancipation, such as the one of Torsmond Lockett. So I want to kind of end this on a more high note. Torsmond Lockett's parents were enslaved in Nelson County, Virginia, and according to their enslaver's will, after he died, they could be emancipated once they reached a certain age. So when they reached that age, after he died, they got their freedom. However, their son Torsmond did not know freedom because he was too young. He had to be 44 in order to be emancipated. He was about 5 or 6 years old when his enslaver died. So he had to wait 30, 40 years to get his emancipation. Well, Torresmont's parents are free, but he's enslaved. Imagine that. And then as Torresmont got older, the person who enslaved him, the person who claimed him, was deeply in debt and was going to sell. And so in order to pay off his debts, he put up Torresmont for sale at an auction in front of Nelson County Courthouse. Torresmont's father learned about the auction, learned that if he didn't do something, his son could be sold, sent to Richmond, or worse, be sent to Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia and never see him again. So somehow his father got the money up to purchase his son. But the thing is, his son was still enslaved, but this time he was enslaved to his father. Even though, I mean, in the eyes of the law, Torresmont was still seen as a slave to his father. He could not be emancipated. But I don't think his father saw his son as his, quote, slave. He saw his son as his son. Well, then Torresmont, 20 years later, turns 44, and on that day he was to be emancipated. His mom, Torresmont's mom, took the deed of emancipation, had it filed in the Lynchburg court, and on that day when he turned 44, Torresmont knew freedom. But unfortunately, his father didn't live long enough to see his son be emancipated. He had died before his son's emancipation. But without his father and the love of his father to ensure that his son would stay with him, you know, if it wasn't for him purchasing his son, Torresmont could have disappeared in the deep south somewhere, never to be seen again. So these are stories and more that are found in Virginia Untold. And then Virginia Untold is not just about the names. We have a lot of names, but it's the names are access points to individual stories of African Americans, enslaved and free, who lived in Virginia from the 1600s to the Reconstruction era. And we have plans even taking it past that, down the road. And the thing is, collectively, these stories form a narrative of a people that has not been fully been told. So hopefully you'll take the opportunity to go through Virginia Untold, find these records, look at these records, and read these stories, and share these stories with others who need to hear them. Now, in order to do that, in order to search, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Vince Brooks, and he's going to talk more about searching Virginia Untold and how to make it make it known to others.
Thanks, Greg. I appreciate everyone who's attending. Let's move on to talk a little bit about how you discover the stories that Greg was talking about. So first of all, the types of records that we have in Virginia Untold are currently our local court records, state government records. Within the Unknown No Longer collection from Virginia Museum of History and Culture, there are personal papers, business records, and published materials. Ideally, as the project progresses, we would like to add newspapers from the library's collection, special collection materials that we have, in addition to our own private papers collection that contains useful information. Right now, these are the types of records that are available, some of which Greg mentioned in his presentation. You know, the coroner's inquisition, deeds of emancipation, but you know, there's a whole range of records, legislative petitions, the registrations. There are contracts from freedmen shortly after the war, tax lists, freedom suits, and more is being added as we're able with you know, staffing and funding. So this list will continue to grow as the project continues to grow, which we'll talk about a little closer to the end there. But this is the search interface. This is what you'll find when you go to Virginia Untold, and there's some preliminary information about how we got started and you know, sort of the background on it that Greg discussed a bit. But by clicking on Search the Narrative, you'll find the search options, and we'll do some live searching in just a minute, but just generally at the top of the page, you can find some basic search suggestions, sort of FAQs on how to do some basic searching. There's a tip sheet on spelling variants. As you can imagine, spellings may vary even within one individual document. So you may have to put in some alternate spellings if you're searching for particular names. There's an extended description of the lists of records from the previous slide, sort of explaining the types of information that you can find in each of those categories of records. So if you're searching for someone in a cohabitation register, what is a cohabitation register and what can you expect to find there or not find there, as the case may be. And then finally, there's a tip sheet on related resources and collections. So other materials in the library's vast collections that, excuse me, may be helpful in sort of broadening your research fodder for your particular area of interest. So let's take a look over here. There we go. So we have this is the live page. So when you click search the narrative, you get here, this is your keyword search or the name search. There's a drop down for all the record types that I mentioned. So if you're only interested in a particular type of record, if you're looking for a marriage and you want to search just cohabitation registers, or you're interested in just deeds of emancipation or manumission, those are selectable here. Or if you're just interested in a particular locality, if you're looking for someone or you're interested in the people of a particular locality and learning more about that, you can limit your search in that way as well. And I should add, and we regularly give updates through social media as well as in print, but this is constantly being added to. So while there may be Accomack County cohabitation registers, or we'll have cohabitation registers for X number of counties, additional records may come to light later. As Greg said, when we go into courthouses, despite the fact that folks have been in and out of these courthouses for hundreds of years, new things are always being discovered. New old things, I should say, are always being discovered. Within a book or in a spot that nobody knew they were being stored. So as we get access to those things and staffing to digitize them, we get those up. So it's an ever-changing, evolving collection. So an example of a search is here, put in Betty Chapman. And when you do a search, what you'll get is these search results with the little thumbnails. Now this is searching across all localities, all record types. This is of course an example that I happen to know exists. So I'm using it, but just to explain, it's sorted, I think, alphabetically by title at the beginning. You can change that sort over here by the date or other topics. You can click on the title of a record and go to what you're probably familiar with as a catalog record, a sort of description of what that is, the date range and et cetera. Or you can click, and this number 7 here is the Betty Chapman case that I'm looking for. You can click on the image, and that will take you directly to the original document as well as a transcription. And I'll touch more on transcriptions in a bit, but the great thing that we have here is because these records have been transcribed, they are keyword searchable and easier to read, quite frankly, for folks not as capable with longhand. So You can look at the transcription as well as switch over to the original record, and you've got both here for your research purposes. Now, as I said, this is searching Betty Chapman across all types and all localities. So you have a lot of stuff here that is not related to the case that I know exists. So there is this freedom suit related to Betty Chapman, but there's also a judgment that occurs a little bit earlier. Betty Chapman's story is kind of similar to Rachel Finley's in that, you know, she should have received freedom considerably earlier than she was able to achieve it. And her connection actually dates back to her mother was a free woman, a free white woman, and despite knowing that fact, she and her siblings and their offspring were kept enslaved until she was able to file her freedom suit, which occurred in 1800. So this is the type of results that you get with a search. I'll show it another one very quickly. John Brown was in Petersburg. So we've got, and similar to the situation that Greg described before, you've got John Brown's 1824 petition to remain in the Commonwealth. And again, you can look at the catalog record, or you can click on the link and you'll be taken to the transcription as well as the original document. So these transcriptions are available for most of the narrative records that are in here. Other things like tax lists and you know, sort of the cohabitation registers, which are lists of names, are indexed. So there's it's transcribed, but sort of in a more limited sense. But the ones that, like coroners' inquisitions and petitions and things like that, are transcribed in full. So that's a little bit on how to search. And let's go back and look at some of the complementary records that are in Virginia Untold. Chancery causes are cases in equity, some of the, as opposed to cases in law. Some of the freedom suits come out of chancery, and some freedom suits come out of law. So the chancery causes are available online, digitized in full court cases, some of them going back to the 18th century. And so you can search across those as well if you're looking in a particular locality for the name of an enslaver, or you know, oftentimes chancery causes deal with estates. So if enslaved people are being sold or being argued over amongst family of an enslaver, that case would probably end up in chancery court, and so you may be able to glean information from that. The lost records localities, the name's a little misleading. Well, that deals with copies of records from counties which suffered loss, record loss, copies of records found in other localities. So if a Botetourt County court case got sent over to Lynchburg for some reason, a copy of that case went over there, the Botetourt records burned, but we have a copy, the Lynchburg copy of the Botetourt case. So when we find those things, they're digitized and made available through the Lost Records Localities database. And that's particularly helpful if you're doing research in an area that suffered significant record loss due to catastrophe, due to fire or war or something along those lines. Their Virginia Chronicle, which is our newspaper collection, that contains over 180,000 issues of newspapers from Virginia, newspaper titles from Virginia, including some West Virginia titles. We're working with the West Virginia Newspaper Project as a partner, so there are West Virginia titles in there as well. The range on those is from about 1787, and some of the papers go into the mid 2000s even. But there are a lot of early papers in there. So if you're dealing with a court case, especially criminal cases, some of which we've scanned, you can oftentimes find much more information about that criminal case from the newspaper accounts, if there is one, than you will, surprisingly, criminal cases are rather sparse in detail in the original form, but the newspapers tend to talk about these things. And Virginia Heritage, that is a consolidated database of finding aids, which is basically descriptions of the various collections in an archive that searches archival material across Virginia. So, everybody from UVA to ODU, JMU, all of the sort of big ones, colleges, and then a lot of smaller archives and historical societies contribute to this consortial database. And so searching Virginia Heritage may not necessarily lead you to things in the Library of Virginia's collection, but it may lead you to other collections elsewhere in Virginia that may be related to your research or related to something that you find. For example, if you find the name of an enslaver, their personal papers collections may reside at Virginia Tech or at some other institution, and you could find that through Virginia Heritage, which makes that helpful as well. Another thing I want to make a plug for, given the variety of folks we probably have in the audience, all the data, the raw data, the indexed information that is behind the scenes in Virginia Untold is freely available. You'll see a screenshot there of the collections data at LVA. There's a link to that from the Virginia Untold page. Things are organized by those record types that I mentioned. And this can be useful for researchers who are doing sort of bigger statistical projects, data visualizations. We worked with someone in Louisiana, I believe, who had some coroner's inquisitions from there, and they used our data from our coroner's inquest to sort of do a statistical analysis of the populations in Virginia and in Louisiana, I believe. So if you're doing that kind of work, all of that information is freely available through the collections data at LVA and also through the open data portal of the state of Virginia. So the transcriptions, how do we get them? The answer is you. We are very lucky to have a lot of enthusiastic, interested folks who have volunteered over the years for making history transcribe. We scan records of various types, including material for Virginia Untold. The materials run the gamut from 18th century court records up to World War II era diaries or WPA life histories. So there's all sort of record styles: handwritten, court script, typewritten. And volunteers go in and, through their joy of interacting with these records or their interest in a particular topic, they just have, like gangbusters, gone in and helped us make those transcriptions, which are so valuable to researchers and make these records so much more accessible in a time when folks expect to be able to keyword search, and the technology is not quite there for longhand documents. But it's as simple, if you would be interested, as registering. There's a registration button in the upper right-hand corner. You get a register to become a transcriber, and then you just head on in. There, as I said, if you're particularly interested in Virginia Untold, you can drill down into that collection and find something that has not been transcribed. And this is what it looks like. You get a side-by-side, the original document, and then a blank space, and you can zoom in and turn around and rotate things to make them easier to read. And you go in and type in what you think you see. If you don't recognize a word, you can always put in illegible. There are tutorials available. There are lots of links within Transcribe talking about how to read old handwriting or tips on this or that and using the software. And so, as well as staff support, you can email Sonia and others as often as you need to ask questions, or as you're getting your feet wet, figure out how to work through the system. But it's actually fairly straightforward. I've been doing it a fair amount of myself during the pandemic time, and so it's really satisfying to be able to go through and transcribe a set of records and know that that document is being made more available to someone down the line who's going to use it to do something fantastic, or discover something about their family that they didn't know. The other resource that I'll plug is our Commonwealth blog. This is one of the places where we tell the stories that Greg is talking about. Rachel Finley and Betty Chapman, their stories were told through our blog. So if you're not a follower of our blog, I would encourage you to sign up. We publish weekly, sometimes multiple times a week, and not only from Virginia Untold, obviously, but lots of other stuff that is happening here at the library. But there's quite a bit of back catalog of Virginia Untold posts and descriptions of these records, examples and stories like the ones Greg shared, that can be really helpful if you're new to research, getting back into it, or you just have questions about things. We explain a lot of that through our blog posts. So I just wanted to give that a plug as well. Another great way to use these records is in the classroom. If we have any teachers on the call, the Commission on African American History Education in the Commonwealth put out a final report several months ago, and it talked about, amongst other things in the 81-page report, was 10 key concepts to integrate African American history into U.S. history lessons more generally. And as an example, two of those concepts are servitude and enslavement, and advocacy and agency. And the stories that Greg told, or the story of Betty Chapman, free and enslaved people being forced into Confederate service to build fortifications. All of that stuff is documented in Virginia Untold. And again, with the original records and the transcriptions, that's a great way to get documents into the classroom and give young people kind of a firsthand look at exactly what people were going through at the time. And I personally believe that's really an invaluable lesson there. If you're currently virtual with your kids, the library has an at-home learning page that also has useful material and information on resources that we have for learning at home. So what's next for Virginia Untold? We currently have an open position to hire a dedicated project manager. Yes, we've been doing this. Greg has done a lion's share of a lot of it. We've done this sort of ad hoc for quite a while with people who have other responsibilities filling in. It's a labor of love, but we're hopeful to find a dedicated project manager thanks to an NHPRC grant that we received. That grant was delayed. The implementation of it was delayed thanks to COVID, but with the hiring, we hope to get it kickstarted. The goal of that project is to digitize from 19 localities the free registers, the registers of free people that Greg talked about, that cover 1793 to 1865, and then to also arrange and describe and digitize free Black records within City of Richmond records. And then engage our citizen archivists to transcribe those digitized records and make them available. This is a huge project, and we hope that it will generate even more interest from the localities. There are way more than 19 localities with free registers, so we hope to engage the circuit court clerks through this process as well, uncover potentially more that are out there that we don't know about, and get those digitized and indexed as well. We're also pending is an NEH grant with the group out of Michigan State University working on enslaved.org. If you're not familiar with this, you can Google the Enslaved Project or go to enslaved.org. There's been a lot of press about it lately, and it's a big aggregator project that's going to pull together lots of other projects like Virginia Untold into one big, using technology I don't understand, to help people drill down into these various collections of records and put together even bigger narratives about individuals who were enslaved or free in the United States, in the Caribbean, elsewhere. It's a very ambitious project, so it's very exciting to be part of that. Feedback is always welcome. You can email us at virginiauntold@virginiamemory.com with questions, or if you don't understand how something works or why it is this way, or why haven't you digitized this yet, the chances are that answer is we don't have money or staff. But you know, we want the feedback. How would something be easier to use or to understand? And I really appreciate your attention, and I want to pass it back over to Sonia so that we have time for questions.
Thank you both so much for your presentations. We do have a lot of questions that have come in. I want to just first clarify that the chat feature appears to not let the participants type. So I apologize for that confusion, but we are seeing all of your questions come in through that questions tab. Off the top, I want to just answer a few questions that were repeated. Yes, this talk will be available after tonight on the Library of Virginia's Facebook page and also our YouTube page. So watch for it there. We will tweet and publicize that this is out and available for you to revisit anytime you would like. There was no handout tonight, but with Vince and Greg's help, I'm sure we can make a PDF of their presentation and share that with you as a link in the video description. So those were two of the easy questions to answer, and now I'm going to get into the hard ones that you all have asked throughout the session. So here we go. From Katie Ritter. I'm interested in what personally drew each of you researchers to this valuable project.
I will start by saying I grew up in Alabama. I grew up in the Deep South, and I grew up at a time when segregation was, even though it was still a fact of life for a long time. And it was as I grown older, I didn't learn about. I was not being taught a lot about enslavement. I was not taught a lot about. The only thing I learned about the Civil War was all the battles that were fought in the great white generals, and never really, got into more than that. And so when I moved here to Virginia, I started working here at the Library of Virginia, and I started reading these records for myself and seeing these stories for myself. I wanted to learn more. Not only did I want to learn more, but I wanted to let others know what I was reading and what I was finding. So I'd share it with my colleagues. I would share it with my family. And then now through Virginia Untold, it's like I'm able to tell everybody. We at the library can tell everybody these stories, these hundreds of thousands of people who have been silenced. And it's a passion project. And I just want more and more people. I want it to be told in the schools. I want it to be taught in universities. I want these stories to be shared so that we have a better understanding from the past that enables us to understand where we're at now with race relations and so forth, the legacy of enslavement that is still felt today. It starts in these records. It starts in these stories. So that's why this project is so important to me.
Yeah, my story is similar in one way, dissimilar in the other. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, so I came from the other direction. And after studying, I studied history at the university level for 6 years, and we never got into any of this stuff. And it wasn't until working here and reading the stories, and honestly, in the last couple of years, being able to draw the through lines from what I'm reading from the 19th century or earlier to the present day, it just makes this all the more important, as Greg said. I mean, there can be no sort of reconciliation without accountability. Like, we all have to own this history, and so it's important to get that word out there and for people to be aware of what they don't know. I mean, even until recently, school textbooks were talking about, enslaved people as laborers or migrant workers, and not really divulging the full horrors of human chattel slavery. So I think it's all the more important to get this information out there and acknowledge what we've failed to acknowledge over the last 400 years.
Absolutely. Thank you both. So this question is from Viola Baskerville. When you find records in county records that are misplaced from another county, how are they indexed? In the county where you found it or in the county where the action occurred? Kind of a specific question there.
Well, typically the records from another county, they're typically copies of the original case that was filed in that county where the case was heard. For example, you have the original court case was heard in Hanover County, but there will be a case similar to it involving the same individuals in a neighboring county, and so that they would need a copy of that or transcript of that original case, and so that case would be filed in the neighboring county, and we would keep it there. We would keep, because that's what we're taught as archivists, is don't mess with the provenance, don't mess with how it was originally done. So so in short, the records would remain in that county where it was filed.
But there would be reference made in a catalog record to,
Yes.
Contains, Caroline County judgment, contains copy of a Hanover judgment or something like that. There is usually cross-referencing, because that is important, and that can get confusing, especially in the lost records database that I mentioned. These are found in one locality but deal with another locality, so how we talk about them can sometimes get confusing. But yeah, we do definitely cross-reference so that you know where the original came from originally.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, Viola. So from Chris Harris, who wrote the petition for Rachel Finley?
Who wrote the petition? They would have a lawyer, they would have an attorney, and there were abolitionists in Virginia who were actively assisting enslaved people to sue for their freedom. Many of them were in the Quakers. You had the Methodist Church that had a number of abolitionists, but there were also other individuals in Virginia who thought slavery was a great evil, and so there would be assistance offered to them from either local families, local attorneys who would be willing to take their case in order to assist them with winning their freedom. So it would have been a counselor or a lawyer that would have assisted them.
Thank you, Greg. This question is from Stephen Hammond. In addition to scanning and indexing all these records, are the paper records being conserved or preserved in some manner?
Go ahead, Dance.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, a big part, and I didn't mention it, a big part of our NHPRC grant for the free registers involves conservation work for all of those. And we definitely, usually before scanning takes place, we're either doing small mending on our own, the archivists do that, or we're very fortunate to have an in-house conservator, conservation lab that we can send materials to. So the goal is scan it once so you don't have to scan it again. So it's often best to get the conservation work done up front so you can get the best quality image. So that's a long answer of yes, we are.
Absolutely. And we are coming up on the hour mark here. For anyone that has to leave us, please be in touch with us at Virginia Untold at virginiamemory.com with any additional questions you may have. For those that want to stay on the call, we'll continue working through some of these questions, if that's all right. Just a few minutes.
Sure.
There are some really good ones here. Again from Katie, I learned in Williamsburg of Washington's will directing freeing of enslaved people at Mount Vernon and the difficulty of where the freed people would live. They did not discuss people having to leave the state. I understood there was a community nearby where the former slaves lived. Am I confused? So I think this is about having to leave the Commonwealth after a year.
The law that was involved telling free people of color who were emancipated to leave the state, that law was passed in 1806. Prior to 1806, free people, there was no restrictions on how long they could remain in the Commonwealth. So those who involved in the Washington's will, they could remain in Virginia for their entire life. But if an enslaved person was emancipated after 1806, those were the ones who were expected to abide by the law to leave the Commonwealth. Now, I will say this: how that law was enforced varied from one locality to another. You had free people of color who remained in that county for 20 years, 30 years, or all their entire life. But there were, in other localities, there were white neighbors who were like, you've been here longer than a year. You should have been gone a long time ago. And so they would encourage the sheriff or whoever to come and arrest them and have them indicted for remaining in the Commonwealth for longer than a year. So how that law was enforced varied from place to place. But that law was passed in 1806.
Yeah, and the purpose of that law was to obviously to minimize the number of free Black people who were in Virginia. And so, it's very interesting because, after Gabriel, after Nat Turner, you find sudden enforcement of this law that, as Greg has mentioned, like may not have been enforced. I'm okay, you're okay. But then all of a sudden, white people get scared, and all of a sudden they want to run out free African Americans. But and don't forget, if those folks can't leave, they're potentially going to be re-enslaved. So it's in the racist view, it's a win-win because you either get rid of them or you get another enslaved person. So that's how that law was leveraged down through the years.
Okay, next up, we have an important question from Keisha Hughes. How is the Library of Virginia specifically engaging the Black community around this project so that they may tell their own stories?
Well, I'll be honest, that's been it's been a challenge. We're historically as a institution of the state, we are seen as part of the system, part of the problem. So we have attempted to engage. One of the main ways that we've done that in the past, pre-pandemic, was actually going out and giving these talks to groups. We were very fortunate to have a good relationship with AUGS, which is the African American Genealogical and Historical Society, and we've given lots of talks to them and gotten feedback in those scenarios. But one of our goals longer term, and quite honestly, it's taken us a little longer to get this up off its feet with some grant funding than we had hoped. But one of our goals long term is to get at least some sort of de facto advisory board and find ways to engage more closely with the African American community in Virginia about this project, and not just in an ad hoc way. Our profession, the archival profession, has a diversity problem. That's an acknowledged professional condition, and so we're looking at things as ways to get more diversity, not only in talking about this subject, but physically in the building. So things like targeted internships, paid targeted internships, to get folks in to even see this as a profession. But well, I'll be honest, it's not a box we've been able to check off our to-do list just yet, and the pandemic has complicated that even more. But we reached out. We just did a program on Martin Luther King Day with Voices for Virginia Children on racial truth and reconciliation. And I'm really hopeful that engaging with not only Voices for Virginia Children, but with the groups that were other panelists that were involved in that program, that we can make some serious headway in doing exactly that, in getting folks, because there's the other aspect to all of these records telling a story is the stories that African American families have in and of themselves that would round out these official records tales, and we don't have that piece yet.
Thank you, Vince. The next question is from Troy Valos. The question is LVA looking to partner with or allow other Virginia libraries and archives to share scans of their material similar to what is found within Virginia Untold? For example, a small local history and genealogical collection has a receipt of a slave sale from their locality. So including other records in Virginia Untold.
Well, that is a longer term goal. Right now, we are focused on our collections, which are very vast and huge collections. But a longer term goal is to do more collaborations with other institutions, other archival institutions, historical societies, even state archives as well in the region, because the stories of African Americans from Virginia were forced or sold or transported down to the deep south. Their story continues in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Georgia. We would like to at some point collaborate with them. So right now we're not able to do it with the staffing level that we have, but hopefully with the coming of a Virginia Untold project manager someone who can be focused on this type of priority, we hope down the road that we could work towards collaborating with other institutions. So thank you for the offer. Thank you for we would like to do that, but at this point we're not able to.
Yeah, and it's great because we've gotten that question from the very beginning. Yeah. The first presentation we gave on this a few years ago was the first question was, can we contribute? And that's our goal, because there are, just like the Virginia Heritage site, I mean, there's a lot of little collections everywhere that can feed into this larger narrative. And if we can get the infrastructure set up where we can begin to do that, I think it's it would be invaluable.
Absolutely. There are several specific questions here. Let me see if I can find another. The question was, are there volunteer opportunities to help with the digitization effort? So Vince answered a little bit of that in his talk. Would you all like to reply again quickly?
As far as with the digitization efforts, again, that's something we would like to be able to do. And hopefully with the coming of a project manager who is fully devoted 100% to this, that could provide that opportunity for volunteer opportunities. And so all I can say right now is just to stay tuned. I wish we could do it right now, but it's a matter of, like Vince said earlier, he and I and others who are working on Virginia Untold, it's a passion project versus a full-time project. And so we're not able to adequately give proper, that kind of oversight for a larger program. But again, with the project manager coming hopefully soon, that would probably will open the doors for volunteer opportunities and these other opportunities with the project. But for now, where you can help out is with Transcribe. That would be a great thing to do.
Absolutely. So please register for an account on Making History Transcribe to get started. There are a lot of chancery causes waiting for you in African American narrative that we've just uploaded tonight. And if you would like to join us at a future virtual volunteer event, I'll drop that link in the chat as well. I see many of our transcribers here with us today, and thank you all for giving your time and energy to this project and help making these records more searchable. Each little bit that you do really does help when we think about it as this large effort that we're all sort of chipping away at. So thank you.
Definitely. Thank you to the transcribers. Thank you so much.
Yes, I agree. Great, tremendous thanks, because without you all, you know, this project would not be as successful or accessible as it is.
Well, there are many other specific questions, but I think that those might be better answered one-on-one. I encourage you to get in touch with the Archives Reference Desk at the Library of Virginia at arcdesk@lva.virginia.gov for some of these questions about your library card or specific collections. They should be able to point you in the right direction. And then anything to do with Virginia Untold, again, please give us email at virginiauntold@virginiamemory.com. We'd be delighted to answer your follow-up questions there. And the last suggestion is to make a frequently asked questions part of Virginia Untold. And yes, we can certainly do that. Greg and Vince, do you have any closing remarks?
Well, no, other than just a thank you again. Thanks again to everyone who was participating in this, and hopefully you were able to learn something, enjoy it, and hopefully we'll get to do this again sometime down the road.
Yeah, again, thanks. I'm wowed by the number of people who were on the call, and that's great. And I hope you all become transcribers, and we look forward to bringing you more collections just as quickly as we're able.
Absolutely. Thank you everyone for being with us tonight, and keep an eye out for more virtual programs from the Library of Virginia. Thank you and good night.
Bye.